Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise today in strong opposition to H.R. 1675. It is really a package of 5 bills which will harm investors and perversely the very small businesses Republicans say they want to help. It does so by ignoring and supplanting the good judgment of the Securities and Exchange Commission, which has already sought to provide small businesses with regulatory relief in these same areas while also ensuring that investors in those businesses have the protections they deserve. The SEC's balanced approach makes sense. As investors who are not confident in the integrity of our markets will simply not invest, which means that job-creating companies will not have the capital they need to grow. In particular, this bill would reduce corporate transparency for employee stockholders by allowing private companies to compensate their employees with up to $10 million in stock every year without having to provide them with relatively simple disclosures about the financials of the company or the risk associated with these securities. Mr. Chairman and members, I'm not going to attempt to hide the facts of this bill with a lot of rhetoric. The fact of the matter is, if employees are being given stock up to $10 million that they don't know the value of, and the companies don't have to disclose anything about the stock, they could end up with worthless stock, not meaning anything, where they had great expectations that somehow, in lieu of raises and more money that they probably deserve, they're being given rotten stock. This provision would double the current disclosure threshold, enlarging larger companies with at least $34 million in total assets to encourage overinvestment by employees in a company that they cannot value and that may never permit them to sell except back to the company at a price set by the company. That's another aspect of this. This type of deregulation invites more Enron-type fraud into the market. Remember Enron? I hope we have not forgotten it already and what happened to those employees. Sometimes you had 2 members of the family, the husband and the wife, who both had this bad stock that they couldn't sell back, they couldn't do anything with. And so, where employees have to trust the accounting of their companies but instead are left with valueless stock. Similarly, this bill would exempt over 60% of public companies from using a computer-readable format known as XBRL in their SEC filings. Exempting such a large number of filers would prevent these companies from being easily compared to other companies that use XBRL to the disadvantage of analysts, researchers, and the SEC, investors, and even the companies themselves. And so basically what you're doing is saying, we're going to have a bill here that would prevent the kind of information that analysts and researchers, the SEC and investors should have, comparing them with other companies, because somehow we protect those who don't want people to really know what their worth is. This is very serious stuff. According to the SEC's investor advocate, this exemption, quote, seriously impedes the ability of the SEC to bring disclosure into the 21st century. That's their quote, unquote. Title III of the bill further supplants the SEC's good judgment by significantly expanding the Commission's recently provided relief for certain mergers and acquisition brokers without imposing 8 important investor protections granted by the SEC. As a result, bad actors who may have committed fraud and shell companies could use this relief, and brokers wouldn't have to make basic disclosures about their conflict of interest. In committee markup, Democrats attempted to close these loopholes, but our efforts were rejected in a party line vote. Can you imagine that the SEC has taken a big step, and they have listened to concerns, they've listened to complaints, and they have gone overboard to make sure that they were providing relief for certain kind of mergers and acquisitions? But what this bill would do is they would take away the ability of the SEC to have investor protections that they have already granted. And so, again, this bill that includes 5 bills, all designed basically to disregard the investors, disregard the small business people, disregard the average American citizen, is a bill that would simply go in the wrong direction, helping the corporations who would simply not want to disclose and not want to be seen for what they are. Title II also fails to sufficiently protect investors, as it eliminates offering liability for brokers who, under the guise of providing exchange-traded fund or ETF research reports, could selectively use data to promote and sell highly risky, complex, and little-known ETFs to unsuspecting retail investors. Finally, the bill seeks to impose additional regulatory burdens on the SEC by requiring it to conduct a duplicative and more onerous retrospective review of its rules. Specifically, Title V would require the SEC within 5 years of enactment to review and revise all of its rules, which I should mention date back to 1934. It would also allow the SEC to override congressional mandates, including those in the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform Bill. Republicans on the Financial Services Committee are always claiming that the SEC is unresponsive to Congress, and yet this provision in the bill would allow the Commission to unilaterally repeal the will of Congress at their whim. Indeed, this title is a thinly veiled Republican attempt to impose cost-benefit type analysis on our regulators as a means of eliminating rules designed to benefit the public and protect investors. H.R. 1675 is an anti-investor bill that will reduce transparency, establish additional administrative burdens to the SEC, and create easily exploited loopholes for bad actors. And so, it is well known that the members on the opposite side of the aisle do not like our cop on the block, which is the SEC. And while they talk about what the SEC will or can or will not do, they simply try and strangle it by being opposed to them have the adequate funding that they need in order to do their job. And so, when we hear today, for example, as the chairman said, he'd be willing to support some funding for SEC, it is very important that they put their money where the mouths are and make sure that the SEC has the money to do its job. In conclusion about this bill goes in the wrong direction. And it's unfortunate at a time when we have gone through a recession based on 2008 and the unwillingness or the inability for our regulatory agencies to watch over our investors and to watch over our average small business people and homeowners, et cetera, et cetera. And while we're trying desperately to clean up this mess with Dodd-Frank reforms, that we would come in here at this time, having experienced all of this, with a bill like this that would try and protect the worst actors in the financial services industry. I would urge my colleagues to